Recently, Enlisted had one of its most interesting and highly anticipated events. This in-game event featured the long-awaited faction battle between the numerous Soviets and the tenacious Japanese. Historically, these armies battled in Manchuria, Mongolia, Sakhalin, the Kuril Islands and Northern Korea. This war between these countries was a short one, only lasting 3 weeks and 4 days as Japan surrendered unconditionally, the added number of the Soviets being a tipping point in the war they were already basically losing to the Americans. This event inside Enlisted, however, was ahistorical, instead taking place in a fictional campaign by Soviets into the Pacific Solomon Islands, the maps we usually see Japan play on. This exciting event had a twist. Rather than players bringing their own armies with their lineups, weapons and soldiers, the players were given a variety of pre-made squads and vehicles to use. We'll look into that more in depth shortly, but some of the key highlights were a heavy tank squad for Japan, featuring one of the event's main rewards, the HT number 6. This is a Japanese Tiger 1, which they never ended up receiving, but Germany had begun the process of shipping them one of these tanks to aid them against the Americans. Other rewards included the Fedorov 25-round burst rifle and the Japanese 20-round Thompson, affectionately called the Jompson on this channel. This event is sort of a testing grounds for a future campaign between the Soviets and the Japanese in the aforementioned areas, most likely Manchuria, giving us a teaser of what is to come. The pre-made event squads ensured a lot of variety and freshness to the gameplay, but a lot of people, myself not included, actually really did not enjoy this event. So, what went wrong? Firstly, we have to consider that this event was played on the Pacific campaign maps. This is the point I most agree with myself. Pacific maps are some of, if not, the worst maps in the entire game. They are just incredibly poorly designed for Enlisted sandbox. You'll often find yourself having to trek across large distances, crossing open areas with little to no cover. You'll also find that the cover you do have is often bamboo and thatch huts, which don't offer cover against machine guns or the rampant high explosive spam that occurs on the Pacific. Maps such as Munda Trail and Gavutu have some of the single-handed worst objectives to play around. The crashed carrier plane in the middle of the ocean, the annoying and stupid caves, and the waterfall area, which I actually feature in my outro since it's calming and serene. However, in-game, it's anything but serene as it's flooded with explosions and soldiers hidden in every nook and cranny, and it's a complete nightmare to play. Will these maps be a problem in the future? No, not really, since Soviets definitely won't be seen in these locations ever again, unless there's an event rerun. I'm hopeful that the Manchuria campaign maps will be absolute bangers, as we do have the current Burma-Myansera location for Japan, which did also feature in this event, and that map is very good. At least, compared to Pacific, although that isn't exactly a high bar to beat. Myansera does stand on its own merits though. But, I suppose this video is focused specifically on reviewing the event, so in this case they were a pretty big drawback of participating. Not only do the Pacific maps not play well, they are also the hardest maps to learn and do well on. Thrusting the player base who probably don't play a lot of Japan, and only some who play allies that occasionally get the Japan maps, is a problem. Bad maps that people are going to struggle on even more since the lack of knowledge and the high skill and learning requirement to play them compounds into a major issue for this event. I'm sure plenty of people didn't even bother to play after seeing the maps they would be forced to play on, skipping the entire event, which is a shame. The second thing to look at is the pre-made squad lineups. This is one of the most contentious things included, but I'll get to why soon. These squads were a variety of specialist squads with no repeats. Players were given a single assaulter squad, AT squad, engineer, machine gunner squad, biker squad, a tank squad, an APC, and 2 plane squads. Within these squads were a variety of different specialists, as well as many different guns. Most guns that you would find would be a semi-auto rifle, the SVT-38 for Soviets, and the Type 4 rifle for Japan. AT soldiers would also get a Panzerfaust 100 or Offenrohr for dealing with vehicles. Assaulters would come with either a Papasha 41 box or Type 100 late, or a weaker BR2 SMG in a PPS-42 and the rewarded Johnson. Machine guns were equipped with a DP-27 or KE-7, and lastly every squad would feature a singular BR-5 weapon, either the ABT-420 or Fedorov-25 for Soviets, or the Type A automatic for Japan. To me, this was one of the coolest parts of the event. Forcing everyone to use an equally matched variety of weapons was a fresh take on Enlisted, wherein the meta is usually to spam as many of the best weapon you can for that battle rating. But this was also a major pain point for a lot of players. I don't think it's necessarily to do with the weapons and variety itself, but what was forced to be used. Objectively, the SVT-38 is one of the best, if not the best semi-auto rifles in the game. It has an anomalous value called extra deviation tau. A quick lesson in how extra deviation tau, or EDT, works. Every weapon in Enlisted has a hipfire accuracy and an aim down sights accuracy. The transition between hip firing and aiming down the sights shrinks this dispersion. However, the speed at which it shrinks is hard capped to a minimum of 0.1 seconds. This isn't so bad, since usually this is how long the animation takes anyway. The problem lies in the EDT value, which is unique to each weapon, although usually weapons within a class share the same value, but there are some exceptions such as the SVT, which we'll look at soon. Essentially, EDT is a value from 0.1 to 0.4 usually, and this is added on top of the base 0.1 seconds it takes to aim. Bolt actions have an EDT of 0.15, so it only takes 0.25 seconds total to become accurate when you aim down the sight. This is usually just the same amount of time it takes for the animation, so bolt actions feel responsive and accurate to use. SMGs usually have a 0.2 value, machine guns usually have 0.3 or 4, but for semi-auto rifles they have a stupidly high 0.3 value, which means it takes 0.4 seconds from when you start aiming down the sight for these guns to become accurate. This fucking sucks. You'll usually aim in 0.2 seconds, and then you are still horribly inaccurate for another 0.2 seconds. This results in a phenomena where semi-autos feel horrible to use, and you may notice this yourself in that the first shot usually seems to miss, even if you are aiming right at the target. So, how is this relevant to people's enjoyment in the event? Well, of course, nobody wants to play Japan. The SVT-38 has a much better EDT than other semi-autos, so feels nice to use, but the Type 4 is not so lucky. Since the semi-autos are the most common weapon in the event, you are at an inherent disadvantage as Japan, and they are less enjoyable to play because of that. Furthermore, the Type 4 is generally considered a meh weapon, with it having to reload a lot slower than the magazine-fed SVT, as well as having awkward sights that not many people are used to, since this is an unpopular weapon for the least popular faction in general. As for the other weapons the event assigns to soldiers, there isn't an inherent problem with the machine guns, BR3 SMGs, AT launchers, or the BR5 rifles. However, for the BR2 SMGs, I don't think people enjoyed using the Johnson, and I'm personally a PPS-42 hater. The reason you wouldn't like to use the Johnson in this event is that the soldiers in this event did not have recoil perks, or many perks for that matter. To me, this actually made the event more interesting, as weapons in Enlisted usually have next to no recoil, but I get enjoyment from mastering the recoil and using more difficult weapons to handle. And this event offered an arena in which the weapons were much more skillful to use since they had a lot of recoil. I can understand, however, that many players would not enjoy this additional challenge, since it's a bit arbitrary and only occurs in this event wherein soldiers have crappy perks. Additionally, the weapons in the event were not upgraded. This means they dealt less damage than normal, had more recoil, and even worse, the dispersion was increased. It's not fun to miss a shot while being accurately on target with your sights, and I had a personal gripe with the unupgraded state of the weapons, making their dispersion trashy. Lastly, in terms of guns, I think that this event suffered since it was testing a future tech tree battle between the factions. Including a large spread of weapons from BR1 to BR5 causes issues. You may be stuck as a soldier using a crappy Type 4 rifle. Meanwhile, an opponent is mowing down your entire squad with a BR5 auto rifle AVT 420. This definitely doesn't feel good, since you aren't necessarily being outskilled, but rather outgeared, and this is out of your control. Also, lastly for the squad lineups themselves, it's a bit weird that you had so many riflemen instead of more specialists. I think it would have been better to get more assaulters in the assault squad, more machine gunners in the MG squad, and more than 2 anti-tank guys in the AT squad. The AT squad particularly was easily the weakest squad, and I almost never spawned it. Every other squad gets 1 AT guy already, and spawning a whole AT squad only to get 1 extra guy is a bit silly. Let's look at the third issue with the event, the balance between factions. We already mentioned the SVT-38 and Type 4, but what else? Well, firstly the planes. The Soviets were given the Su-2, an attack bomber with 6 100kg bombs, as well as the Yak-7B, a competent fighter armed with 2 50kg bombs. What did Japan get? Well, they got the awful, stupid, no good B5N2, a slow attacker, although with a good turning rate, that has a pair of 250kg bombs. That doesn't sound so bad, right? Well, it is, sadly. The B5N2 may have the fastest turn rate in the game, but it also doesn't have a singular forward-facing machine gun. It's almost helpless against the other planes apart from its unreliable rear gunner. Japan also got the A6M2 Racing, also known as the Zero, a decent fighter with 2 bombs weighing 60kg each. So, the USSR planes are easily a million times better than what Japan has, but that's kind of expected in Enlisted anyway. Japan just has crappy planes, and for some reason the good ones in War Thunder don't get brought over, at least for now. But being simply outclassed is not the end of Japan's woes, as on the Pacific maps, which doesn't include Miansera, the planes had to take off via carrier. This massively impacts the time it takes for the planes to deliver a payload on an important objective or against a tank in a powerful position. Not to mention how vulnerable a plane taking off is against other aircraft. And the best part? The Soviet planes don't have a carrier takeoff. Since Soviets never play on these maps, it's just not part of the game for them. They get to spawn their planes in the air. Before moving on to my feedback and review summary of this event, I wanted to mention some other smaller issues with the event, as well as the aspects of the event that worked well that I didn't already make note of. One small thing, it would be nice if we could edit the event squads to change the order of the soldiers. This is a tiny thing, but I like to keep my engineers in the first slot, and important weapons in the 2nd through 5th slots, and lastly important specialists towards the back of the squad. It just helps with muscle memory and assessing who is alive in my squad in the moment. I like to spawn as my engineer so I'm in control keeping them alive, and then I like stuff like my assaulter guns to be the next weapons I can cycle to in the squad. I'm sure you have your own preferred way of ordering your squads, unless you're absolutely crazy and leave them randomly set up, but it would have been nice if we had this in the event. Secondly, the event was run on a daily reward system, rather than the usual one stage every 2 days. This meant people had to play every day and stress about completing each stage. The amount of score required was also 20% more than usual, at 12,000 in 1 day rather than 20,000 in 2 days. This probably really burned out people who were not enjoying the event, and I'd rather see something like 8,000 points per day or just the old 20,000 in 2 days. Another good idea we should bring forward is randomly assigning players to the different factions/teams. This is very good, because on the first day of the event, Japan had no players and Soviets were stacked and winning every match. This was mostly a UI issue, I think, as players didn't realize they could even queue as Japan instead of the default USSR, and players that realized the meta would queue Soviets anyway for easier games. This made the first day of the event a lot worse, as queue times for Soviets were incredibly long and people avoided experimenting with Japan. In all future events, it should be forced join any from the start to avoid this issue. I'd also like to mention that all players were given the same number of squad slots, so everybody had all the infantry squads, but also still had 1 tank, 2 planes, and the APC, as well as the bikes, but those are not really important. This was really nice, and you saw a lot more APCs used in the event, and it also meant that vehicle cycling was not a thing, since if somebody spawned their tank and then were eliminated, they couldn't just immediately spawn a new tank and keep tanking. This felt a lot better than like the normal Enlisted gameplay loop, where somebody's in a powerful position in a tank, you kill them and they just come back immediately and keep farming the objective. So let's jump into my feedback and what I would suggest the devs implement and change for future events like these. First off, I would like to say, I did enjoy this event a lot. I would love to see more of these events, but with the following changes. Change number 1 is I think that we should address the perk situation a little bit. Not having any perks at all on our soldiers was a little bit weird, and there was even a problem for me specifically is that sometimes some of the soldiers randomly had the grenade throwing range perk, which really threw me off every time I was trying to throw an explosion pack at an APC, lined up my throw, cooked it, and then I lobbed it 75,000 yards past the target, scored a home run. I don't know American sports at all, my bad. And just completely miskilling the APC. That was so annoying. Please do not include that perk in the future. Perks I would include would be stuff like Vitality, although that's interesting if we should include Vitality because it does change the balance of the weapons. It affects SMGs a lot more, but it also makes us more resistant to stuff like explosions and also gives us a higher chance of going down instead of just dying. Maybe also include the down chance perk. Maybe you want to include the dispersion perk, the weapon change speed perks, some of the mobility perks maybe some stamina perks. Although we did have flasks in the event, but it is nice to have flasks plus stamina perks. Maybe we could also consider recoil perks, like vertical recoil perks or horizontal perks, but not really horizontal, more just the vertical recoil perks. I think giving us the full 40%, or even sometimes just not adding this perk, I did enjoy having more vertical recoil on the weapons, but maybe if we're using weapons that are a lot tougher to use, like that are not SMGs, maybe like assault rifles or select fire rifles, maybe then you should still include the recoil perks, but like honestly for me I enjoyed not having them, so maybe don't add those. Next point, I would definitely upgrade the goddamn guns, please. It was so annoying to have the worst dispersion and the worst damage. The guns were just less reliable in this event. Funnily enough, apart from the Johnson and the Fedorov 25, since those are technically like event or like reward weapons, right? Those are always max upgraded. So you would randomly have like a upgraded Fedorov 25 rifle or the Johnson, kill people, and like it was great, it was accurate, they did the damage, like all the guns should be upgraded. Next, talking of guns, I think that a future event like this should narrow the scope, focus a bit more on a tighter spread of weapons within like 1 or 2 tiers of each other, so that all the soldier types are more equally matched. Running around as an assaulter with a BR2 SMG, when there's a potential rifleman running around with a Type A automatic, and you've got a crappy PPS 42, that's not good. However, if you had a Corrali for 39M against a soldier with an FG42, like that's a little bit closer. I mean, it's still not great, maybe like that's a bad example. It's difficult to include the select fire rifles since they kind of nullify the point of any other weapons. But yeah, if we're going to do BR1 bolt actions, we shouldn't have like BR4 SMGs in the mix. Do you get what I'm saying? Furthermore, let's add more specialists and make each squad more unique. If I'm looking at an assaulter squad, I kind of want that squad to have like 4 assaulters and an engineer and then like nothing else. That would like make the assaulter squad like a dedicated like 5-man. Give them all SMGs as well, actually. Even the engineer, that's 5 SMGs. That's a squad for pushing inside a building and clearing out CQC. And then if you want the machine gunner squad, put an engineer with a bolt action, maybe a radio guy, and then like 4 machine gunners with like MG42s. Don't even include the anti-tank soldiers in these squads, because then you can have an anti-tank squad with like 3 or 5 anti-tank soldiers who've all got Panzerfaust, and like when there's an enemy tank really holding back your team, you spawn that squad, and then that squad is applied to that problem, and each squad has like its role and its utility and its trade-off. Maybe you could have a radio squad, or like, you know, you could just make the squads more what they're meant to be. I just think that would be cool, especially in a format where you can add like custom kind of squads to things. Like an engineer being in an assaulter squad and having an SMG. Like that's not something we usually have. It would be very unique. Another thing, just really quick, please fix the grenade loadouts. Please give every soldier a TNT charge, and please give every soldier an explosion pack. Maybe some soldiers you could give frags or other utilities, but at the very least every soldier needs a TNT charge. It is incredibly annoying not being able to do anything when you find an APC or you are flank the tank. Like having your anti-tank guy being dead and you have no explosion packs, you can't kill the tank, you don't have any TNT charge, you can't destroy the APC or the tank. So annoying. Please fix that in the future. My next point here, avoid the bad maps. Now this is like a tough one to do. Usually I'm talking about like Pacific or Tunisia or just like maybe like Hurtgen Forest, just as well as like the weaker maps of certain campaigns. If you're gonna add Moscow, don't include like Monastery, because Monastery is not that good of a map. We should try and create like a more focused pool of the most enjoyable maps that play well, are balanced well for all the different things. And yeah, obviously just don't put us in Pacific again. If you're gonna do an event with Japan, I would just take Japan out of Pacific and put them in the new area. Like, let's have a Japan versus Axis. Like, Germany and Japan won World War II and then they wanted to fight each other. So Japan met Italian and German soldiers in Normandy. Like, that would be cool. Also talking about the vehicles, let's pit vehicles against each other a bit more equally. BR3 tanks should fight BR3 infantry and BR3 planes. We shouldn't have to kill a BR5 tank with a BR2 plane. That's not it, Chief. Lastly, personally, I liked the force squad and weapon varieties, and maybe with the adjustments and suggestions I've given, it would be more accepted by more people, but I think it's still worth considering allowing people to bring their own squads and lineups to the event. Obviously still within the rules of the event, but I know a lot of people would still like to use their soldiers and the weapons they choose, and like their premiums and their event squads and stuff like that. So maybe we can have versions of these events where it's a preset lineup and then the option to choose a preset lineup or create your own lineup. I think that would be cool. And that's my review of the Pacific Japan vs Soviets events. How was your experience in the event? I personally had a lot of fun with it, and I didn't mind most of the issues that other players had. I can agree though that these issues should be remedied, and I would love to see more of these fair fight events in the future. I think they keep the game fresh and allow people an opportunity to use higher tier gear for a faction they may not have worked through, and it may push them to begin playing that faction as well, and exploring and experimenting within Enlisted. If you have feedback for the event specifically, such as an issue I missed or something you like, leave it in the comments and I'll share any good ones with Major McDonald when I get the chance to pester him. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like as it helps me out and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to support me further, consider becoming a member. You'll get a bunch of perks which you can see the full list of when clicking on the join button. As always, a huge thank you to my current supporters. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day and I'll catch you next time. Bye bye!